I'm Sarah Martinez, and I was 29 when something unthinkable happened. Picture this. You're in the hospital, bringing your first child into the world, when your in-laws decide to change the locks on your house. But what they discovered inside would tear their family apart forever. When Marcus and I got married in June 2023, his parents Linda and Robert seemed like the kind of in-laws you'd actually want. Linda would text me recipes and invite me to their family book club. Robert would ask about my marketing work and seem genuinely interested in my career. For the first 6 months, I thought I'd won the in-law lottery. The first red flag came that Christmas. We were hosting dinner at our house for the first time as a married couple. I had spent weeks planning the menu, decorating, making sure everything was perfect. Linda arrived 2 hours early, not to help, but to rearrange my entire table setting. She moved my centerpiece, switched out my cloth napkins for paper ones she'd brought, and when I gently asked why, she said, "Oh honey, this is just how we've always done Christmas in our family." Marcus brushed it off. "That's just mom being mom," he said. "She means well." But I started paying attention. In January, Linda used her spare key to let herself into our house while we were both at work. She said she wanted to water my plants as a surprise, but I found her going through our mail and reorganizing our kitchen cabinets. When I mentioned it to Marcus, he said I was being paranoid. By spring, the incidents were escalating. Linda would show up unannounced during my work-from-home days, walking right into my home office during video calls. She'd comment on our grocery choices when she saw the receipts on our counter. She started giving me unsolicited advice about everything from my skincare routine to how often I should vacuum. Robert was subtler, but equally invasive. He'd make comments about our thermostat settings when he visited, adjusting it without asking. He'd critique Marcus's car maintenance schedule and suggest I should be doing more to support my husband's responsibilities. When we bought new living room furniture, he spent 20 minutes explaining why our choices were impractical. The breaking point should have been my birthday in August 2025. I had planned a small dinner party with my college friends, people Linda and Robert had never met. Linda called me the morning of the party to say she and Robert would be coming early to help set up. When I explained it was just going to be my friends, she said, "Well, we're family now. We should be included in everything." They showed up anyway. Linda spent the entire evening telling embarrassing stories about Marcus's childhood to my friends, while Robert dominated conversations about politics and made several of my guests visibly uncomfortable. When one of my friends tried to change the subject to my work, Linda interrupted to say, "Oh, Sarah's little marketing job is so cute, but we're hoping she'll focus on more important things soon," while rubbing my arm meaningfully. That night, after everyone left, I started keeping a detailed record. I created a private document on my phone and began noting every incident with dates and specifics. Marcus thought I was overreacting, but something told me I might need evidence someday. The pattern became crystal clear over the next few months. Linda and Robert weren't just boundary crossing. They were systematically inserting themselves into every aspect of my life while undermining my authority in my own home. They'd rearrange things when they visited, critique my choices, and then frame their behaviors helpful or loving when I objected. When I got pregnant in October 2025, their behavior intensified dramatically. Linda started calling daily with advice about prenatal vitamins, exercise, and diet. She'd show up with baby items I hadn't registered for and act hurt when I suggested we might want to choose our own things. Robert began making comments about how I'd need to be more careful with money now and suggesting that maybe I should consider staying home after the baby was born. But the most telling incident happened in February 2026, just a month before my due date. I was having severe morning sickness and had to leave work early. When I got home, Linda and Robert were in my house. They'd let themselves in because they wanted to prepare some meals for the freezer. They'd completely reorganized my kitchen, thrown away food they deemed unhealthy, and Linda was going through my pregnancy journal, which I'd left on the counter. When I asked them to leave, Linda started crying and said I was being hormonal and ungrateful. Robert told Marcus I was being unreasonable, and that pregnant women often became irrational. Marcus, caught between us, suggested we all needed to communicate better. That night, I realized something chilling. They weren't just overstepping boundaries. They were systematically conditioning Marcus to see my objections as unreasonable while positioning themselves as the rational, caring family members. Every time I pushed back, they'd frame me as the problem. I also realized they had something most boundary crossers don't have: unlimited access. They had our spare key, they knew our schedules, and they trained Marcus to see their behavior as normal family closeness. When I went into labor on March 15, 2026, they knew I'd be in the hospital for hours, completely vulnerable, and unable to protect my space. 3 days after bringing Emma home from a hospital, Marcus and I pulled into our driveway at 2:30 p.m. on March 18th. The first thing I noticed was that our front porch looked different. My welcome mat had been moved, and there were small metal shavings near the door frame. When Marcus tried to use his key, it wouldn't turn. "That's weird," he said, jiggling the key in the lock. "Maybe it's just stuck?" I was holding Emma, exhausted from 3 sleepless nights, when the reality hit me. "Marcus, they changed our locks." He looked at me like I'd suggested aliens had landed on our roof. "Come on, Sarah. That's crazy. Why would they do that?" But I knew. While I'd been in the most vulnerable moment of my life, bringing our daughter into the world, Linda and Robert had used their spare key to enter our home and change our locks. In most jurisdictions, changing locks on a rental property without proper legal justification is considered an illegal lockout, and when done without notice or legal authority, it often violates tenant protection laws. Marcus called his mother while I stood on our own front porch, holding our newborn daughter, unable to enter my own home. "Oh, honey, we were so worried about security while you were at the hospital," Linda's voice carried through the phone speaker. "Robert thought it would be safer to upgrade your locks. We have new keys for you, of course. We just wanted to surprise you with better security for the baby." The explanation was smooth, rehearsed, caring. But I'd been documenting their behavior for months. This wasn't about security. This was about control. And more importantly, it was about access. "Where are the new keys?" Marcus asked. "We have them at our house. We thought we'd bring them by later with dinner. We wanted to give you time to settle in first." Later. They had changed our locks and planned a control when we could access our own home. I felt something cold settle in my stomach that had nothing to do with postpartum exhaustion. We drove to Linda and Robert's house to get the keys. When Robert handed them to Marcus, he was wearing latex gloves. "Just finished some yard work," he said quickly, but I noticed he avoided eye contact with me entirely. Linda was unusually quiet, none of her typical chatter about the baby or how I was feeling. When we finally got back into our house, I could immediately tell someone had been inside for more than just a quick lock change. The air smelled different, like Linda's perfume mixed with Robert's aftershave. My pregnancy journal was no longer on the kitchen counter, where I'd left it. The mail I'd organized in neat piles had been rifled through. Several drawers in our bedroom were slightly open, though I always closed them completely. But the most telling detail was in my home office. I'd left my laptop closed on my desk, but it was now open, though the screen was black. When I touched the mouse, it asked for my password. Someone had been trying to access my computer. That night, after Marcus fell asleep, I sat in the nursery with Emma and realized what had really happened. Linda and Robert hadn't just changed our locks for security. They'd used those 3 days to conduct a thorough search of our home. They'd gone through our papers, our mail, our personal belongings. They tried to access my computer and had definitely read my pregnancy journal, which contained my honest thoughts about their behavior over the past months. I thought about the latex gloves Robert had been wearing. You don't wear gloves for yard work when it's March in Phoenix. You wear gloves when you don't want to leave fingerprints. The next morning, I started checking our house more systematically. My filing cabinet, which I always kept locked, had scratches around the keyhole. The spare key I kept taped under the bottom drawer was gone. Our bedroom closet had been searched, clothes moved, boxes shifted. Even our bathroom medicine cabinet showed signs of being examined. But here's what Linda and Robert didn't know. I wasn't just a paranoid daughter-in-law keeping petty notes about boundary violations. I was a marketing coordinator who'd spent 2 years working on a campaign for a law firm specializing in family law. I knew exactly what constituted harassment, invasion of privacy, and illegal entry. And I'd been documenting everything with dates, times, and photographs since August. What they also didn't know was that my little marketing job, as Linda had dismissively called it, had taught me about digital security. My laptop was equipped with software that logged every access attempt, every failed password entry, and every file that had been opened. If they'd managed to get past my password, I'd have a complete record of what they'd accessed. But most importantly, what Linda and Robert didn't realize was that their 3-day search of our home had revealed something about them that would change everything. Because while they'd been looking for evidence to use against me, they'd left evidence of themselves. And what I was about to discover in the coming days would expose secrets that would tear their family apart from the inside. The lock change wasn't the end of their invasion. It was just the beginning of their downfall. So after Robert was wearing those latex gloves when he handed us the new keys, which you don't wear for yard work in March, would you trust your in-laws if they change your locks while you were giving birth? Comment your thoughts below. Now let me tell you what I discovered when I checked our security system the next day. I had installed a security system 3 months earlier that they'd never noticed. After Linda's February invasion of my kitchen and pregnancy journal, I'd quietly upgraded our home security without telling Marcus. The system wasn't just cameras. It was a comprehensive monitoring setup that logged when someone accessed the system remotely, in front of the security camera recorder, or from the local network, recording which user logged in and at what time. When I checked the security logs on March 19th, the day after we got our new keys, the evidence was devastating. The system had captured everything during those 3 days while I was in labor. Linda and Robert had entered our house at 11:47 a.m. on March 15th, just 2 hours after Marcus called to tell them I was in active labor. They'd spent 4 hours inside our home that first day. But that wasn't the most damning part. The motion sensors showed they'd returned every single day I was in the hospital. March 16th, 2:30 p.m. to 6:15 p.m. March 17th, 10:20 a.m. to 4:45 p.m. They hadn't just changed our locks and searched our house once. They'd been conducting a systematic, methodical investigation of our entire lives while I was bringing their granddaughter into the world. The security footage revealed exactly what they'd been doing during those hours. I watched Linda go through every drawer in our bedroom, photographing the contents with her phone. I watched Robert in my home office, not just trying to access my laptop, but also photographing documents from our filing cabinet, which he'd somehow managed to unlock. The spare key I kept taped under the drawer wasn't missing because they'd taken it. It was missing because they'd used it to access our private financial documents. But the most chilling footage was from March 17th, the day before we came home. Linda had brought a notebook and was sitting at our kitchen table, writing down information while Robert called out details from our bank statements, insurance policies, and tax documents. They weren't just snooping. They were documenting our financial situation with the thoroughness of private investigators. The cameras had captured something else that made my blood run cold. While Linda was photographing our bedroom, she'd found my private journal, where I'd been recording their boundary violations. The footage showed her reading it for over 20 minutes, taking pictures of every page with her phone. She discovered that I'd been documenting their behavior since August, noting dates, times, and specific incidents. What they'd also found was far more damaging than my complaints about their boundary crossing. Hidden in our filing cabinet was documentation of something I discovered about Robert's business finances. Information I'd stumbled upon months earlier when I'd helped Marcus organize some family paperwork for a loan application. Robert owned a small construction consulting firm, and while helping Marcus gather family financial documents for our mortgage refinance, I'd noticed discrepancies in Robert's tax filings that didn't match the income statements he'd provided for Marcus's loan application. The document showed he'd been significantly underreporting his income to the IRS while inflating it for lending purposes, a form of fraud that could result in both criminal charges and massive financial penalties. I kept copies of these documents because something told me they might be important someday, but I'd never planned to use them unless absolutely necessary. I'd hidden them in our personal filing cabinet, thinking they'd be safe there. But Linda and Robert had found them during their 3-day search. The security footage showed Robert's face when Linda handed him the folder containing his own tax documents and loan applications. He'd gone completely white, then sat down heavily in our kitchen chair. They'd realized that their systematic violation of our privacy had led them to discover evidence of Robert's own financial crimes. The cameras captured their panicked conversation, though I couldn't hear the audio. Robert was pacing, running his hands through his hair. Linda was frantically taking pictures of the documents with her phone, not to use against us, but to figure out how much evidence we had against them. They'd broken into our house looking for ammunition to use against me, and instead they'd stumbled upon proof of Robert's federal tax evasion. What made their situation even worse was the method they'd used to access our home. Modern access control systems log entry attempts in real time, and their use of a spare key followed by unauthorized lock changes created a clear digital trail of illegal entry. They hadn't just committed a simple boundary violation. They'd committed breaking and entering, invasion of privacy, and potentially burglary by accessing our private documents. The security logs showed something else that proved their intent was an innocent concern for our safety. After discovering the financial documents, they'd spent another 2 hours searching our house even more thoroughly. They'd gone through our computers, our phones, our mail, and every storage area in our home. They were looking for any other evidence we might have about Robert's business practices. By the time I finished reviewing all the footage and logs, I realized Linda and Robert had made a catastrophic miscalculation. They'd thought they were conducting a secret investigation of their problem daughter-in-law. Instead, they created a comprehensive video record of their own criminal behavior, while accidentally exposing Robert's tax fraud. The security system wasn't just recording locally. Everything was being automatically backed up to a cloud server that only I had access to. Even if they somehow discovered and destroyed our home system, the evidence of both their break-in and Robert's financial crimes was already safely stored beyond their reach. The next morning, March 20th, Linda called me with a tone I'd never heard before. Her usual confident, controlling demeanor was gone. "Sarah, honey," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "Robert and I were thinking we might have been a little too involved lately. Maybe we should give you and Marcus some space with the new baby." He almost laughed. After months of systematic boundary violations and 3 days of criminal invasion of our privacy, they were suddenly concerned about giving us space. But I knew exactly what had triggered this sudden change of heart. "That's very thoughtful of you, Linda," I replied calmly. "I think some space would be good for everyone." What Linda and Robert didn't realize was that their attempt to gather evidence against me had just handed me enough evidence to destroy their family, their finances, and Robert's freedom. And I was about to decide exactly how to use it. When Linda and Robert broke into our house on March 17th, they weren't just looking for ammunition against me. They were about to hand me the evidence that would destroy their own family. The security footage captured the exact moment Linda and Robert realized the magnitude of their mistake. When Linda handed Robert the folder containing his own financial documents, his reaction was immediate and telling. He'd gone completely white, then collapsed into our kitchen chair, running his hands through his hair repeatedly. They'd spend the next 20 minutes frantically photographing the documents with their phones, not to use against me, but to assess exactly how much evidence I possessed. Because when I'd helped Marcus gather those family financial documents for our mortgage refinance 8 months earlier, I'd noticed something that made my marketing background in legal compliance immediately raise red flags. Robert's construction consulting firm had been reporting dramatically different income figures to different agencies. The tax return showed annual income of $180,000. But the loan applications he'd submitted showed income of $320,000. That's not a bookkeeping error. That's falsifying records to federal lending institutions. Submitting false documents to banks isn't just a tax issue. It's criminal fraud. What made Robert's situation even more dangerous was the systematic nature of the discrepancy. The documents I'd copied showed 3 consecutive years of underreporting income to the IRS while inflating it for lending purposes, a pattern that demonstrated willful intent, not negligence. The IRS considers this clear evidence of tax evasion, and it's a federal felony. Tax evasion is punishable by up to 5 years in prison, fines of up to $100,000 for individuals, and full repayment of all taxes owed, including interest and substantial civil penalties. Based on the income discrepancies I'd documented, Robert had likely evaded approximately $140,000 in federal taxes over 3 years. Using the current penalty structure, he was facing not just the back taxes, but civil fraud penalties of 75% of the underpayment, an additional $105,000 alone. The IRS charges interest at the federal rate plus 3%, currently 7% annually, Q1 2026, and 6% annually, Q2 2026, compounding on both the original tax liability and any penalties assessed. But the criminal exposure was what truly terrified them. Robert's case had everything prosecutors love: systematic underreporting, falsified loan documents, and a clear paper trail spanning multiple years. The IRS Criminal Investigation Division only recommends prosecution in cases they think they can win. Their conviction rate is above 90%. And the statute of limitations for assessing federal income tax extends to 6 years if you underreport income by more than 25%, and becomes indefinite if fraud is proven. Robert's oldest fraudulent returns were from 2023, meaning the IRS had until at least 2029 to pursue criminal charges, and potentially longer if they could prove the systematic fraud I documented. The security cameras captured something else that revealed just how desperate they'd become. After discovering the tax documents, they'd spent another 2 hours searching our house even more thoroughly than before. They'd gone through every computer file, every piece of mail, every storage area. They weren't just looking for additional evidence of Robert's crimes. They were trying to determine if I had documentation of other illegal activities. What they didn't know was that my security system had been automatically uploading everything to a cloud server that only I controlled. Even if they somehow discovered and destroyed our local recording equipment, the evidence of both their criminal break-in and Robert's tax fraud was already safely stored beyond their reach. The most damning footage came from their final hour in our house on March 17th. Robert was on his phone, pacing frantically while Linda continued photographing documents. Based on his body language and the way he kept gesturing toward the papers, he was clearly calling someone, likely a lawyer or accountant, trying to figure out his legal exposure. The conversation lasted nearly 30 minutes, with Robert becoming increasingly agitated as it progressed. When Linda called me on March 20th with her sudden desire to give us space, I could hear the fear in her voice. Her usual confident, controlling tone was completely gone, replaced by something that sounded almost pleading. They'd realized that their systematic violation of our privacy had led them directly into a trap of their own making. The irony was perfect. They'd broken into our house looking for evidence to use against me, and instead they'd handed me everything I needed to expose Robert's federal crimes. Documented, time-stamped, and automatically preserved in a format that would be admissible in court. Their 3-day search of our home had created a comprehensive video record of multiple felonies, all captured on a system they didn't even know existed. I wasn't just a new mother they'd underestimated. I was someone who'd spent 2 years working on legal compliance campaigns, someone who understood exactly how federal investigations worked, and someone who'd been methodically documenting their boundary violations for months. And now I had to decide exactly what to do with that power. On April 2nd, exactly 2 weeks after Linda and Robert broke into our house, I made the decision that would end their family as they knew it. I called the IRS Criminal Investigation Division. The security footage I'd collected wasn't just evidence of their break-in. It was documentation of their discovery of Robert's systematic tax fraud. When I explained to the agent that my in-laws had illegally entered my home and found evidence of federal tax evasion, she asked me to come in immediately with all my documentation. Tax evasion carries serious federal penalties. The agent explained that when the IRS finds clear signs of willful deception, especially when amounts are high or behavior is repeated over years, they pursue prison time. Robert's case had everything prosecutors look for: falsifying records and submitting false documents. The income discrepancies I'd documented showed he'd underreported approximately $140,000 in income over 3 years while inflating those same figures for loan applications. That kind of pattern, underreporting to the IRS while inflating numbers elsewhere, is textbook fraud. What made Robert's situation catastrophic was the permanence. For fraudulent returns filed with intent to evade tax, there is no statute of limitations. The IRS can assess additional taxes and civil fraud penalties at any time. For tax debt arising from fraud convictions, the collection period never expires. Robert wasn't just facing criminal charges. He was facing financial ruin that would follow him for the rest of his life. When I met with the agent on April 4th, I brought everything: the security footage, the financial documents Robert had photographed in our home, my documentation of their boundary violations, and evidence of their illegal entry. She reviewed the material for 2 hours, occasionally pausing the video to take notes when Linda and Robert were photographing documents or discussing their findings. "This is one of the most comprehensive cases of self-incrimination I've seen," she said, looking up from the footage. They not only committed breaking and entering to access evidence of tax fraud, they created a video record of themselves discovering and documenting their own crimes. The agent explained that the IRS Criminal Investigation Division conducts forensic financial audits, analyzing years of tax filings, income, asset transfers, and bank activity to build cases showing intent to deceive. But Robert had already done half their work for them. The security cameras captured him examining his own fraudulent documents while Linda photographed them with her phone. Within a week, the IRS had opened a full criminal investigation into Robert's construction consulting firm. The investigation moved faster than typical cases because the evidence was already documented, and the pattern of fraud was clear. On April 15th, ironically tax day, federal agents executed a search warrant on Robert's business and home. Linda called me that afternoon, sobbing into the phone. "Sarah, please, you have to help us. They took all of Robert's business records. They said he's under criminal investigation. Please, we have a granddaughter together. Family should protect family." The irony was stunning. The woman who'd spent months systematically violating my boundaries, who'd broken into my home while I was giving birth, who'd tried to gather evidence against me, was now begging me to protect her from the consequences of her own actions. "Linda," I said calmly, "you taught me something important about family. You showed me that family means respecting boundaries, honoring privacy, and treating each other with dignity. You also showed me what happens when people don't learn those lessons." Marcus was devastated when the full scope of his parents' actions became clear. The break-in, the search of our home, his father's tax fraud. It was too much for him to process. But when he saw the security footage of his parents systematically violating our privacy while I was in labor, Something shifted in him permanently. "I can't believe they did this while Emma was being born," he said, watching his mother photograph our private documents. "I can't believe they used our most vulnerable moment to try to destroy our marriage." By May 2026, Robert had been indicted on 3 counts of tax evasion and 2 counts of filing false documents. His construction business collapsed as clients learned about the investigation. Linda filed for divorce in June, trying to protect her assets from the inevitable civil judgments. The most satisfying moment came in July when Linda called one final time. Her voice was different, smaller, defeated. "Sarah, I want you to know that I understand now. What we did was wrong. The way we treated you, the way we invaded your privacy, the way we tried to control your life, it was wrong. And I'm sorry." I believed her apology was genuine, but it was also far too late. The damage they'd inflicted on our family was irreparable, and the consequences they were facing were entirely of their own making. Robert ultimately pleaded guilty in September 2026 to avoid a trial. He was sentenced to 18 months in federal prison and ordered to pay $340,000 in back taxes, penalties, and interest. The judge noted in her sentencing remarks that the case demonstrated how attempts to violate others' privacy often expose the violator's own crimes. As I write this in December 2026, Emma is 9 months old, and Marcus and I are stronger than ever. We've moved to a new house with an upgraded security system and new locks that only we have keys to. We've established clear, firm boundaries with the few family members who remained in our lives, and we've learned that protecting your peace sometimes requires cutting off people who refuse to respect your boundaries. Linda and Robert thought they could use my most vulnerable moment to gather evidence against me. Instead, they handed me everything I needed to expose their crimes and protect my family from their toxic behavior. Sometimes the best consequence isn't revenge at all. It's simply allowing people to face the natural results of their own actions. The most important lesson I learned wasn't about security systems or legal documentation, though those certainly helped. It was that when people show you who they are through their actions, believe them. And when they violate your boundaries systematically, document everything. Because eventually, people who live by manipulation and control will create the evidence of their own downfall. If you've experienced boundary violations from family, subscribe for more stories like Sarah's. Watch next: How to Protect Yourself from Family Financial Abuse.